After a successful decade run as a feature documentary, Eyes of the Mothman is now a podcast containing bonus information and, for the first time ever, the complete, unedited field interview tapes with eyewitnesses, experts, and those who were directly impacted by the Mothman incidents that occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966 and 1967. Although this podcast is meant to act as a historical record and an archive of the events that transpired, all material contained here is not for reproduction without the written consent by the copyright holder, Redline Studios Incorporated. Episode 16 is next for the Eyes of the Mothman podcast, and we are going to take a look back at the very long interview with Chad Lambert, who is an author, a comic book author, which I'm always like, I'm not going to lie, I'm always a little reluctant to say that because I feel like it takes away a little something from Chad's expertise and knowledge of the subject matter. And I do remember talking with him about that back then. You know, sometimes you do a documentary and you're talking to a scientist, you're talking to an author, a historian. And, you know, the fact that Chad, his background is he works in comic books, he's an author. For me, it didn't bother me, but we did discuss back then, like, oh, how do we like phrase this so people don't not take you seriously? Because if I remember correctly, you know, Chad is from Cincinnati, Ohio area, and he had kind of stumbled upon the Mothman story, you know, way back when I did too. Literally back then, there were like 5 people who I think were like doing something with Mothman in terms of creatively. You know, our documentary, the John Keel book, Chad was getting into translating some stories from Mothman into comics. And so there was not a whole lot of people. So we had met, and, you know, it's funny in the same way that, you know, I, quote unquote, became a little bit of like a Mothman expert in doing this movie. Chad, the same thing kind of happened for him because he had taken the same due diligence and just thorough process of research and investigation for his comic series that he had put together.
I mean, you have to accept that you're switching gears when you're talking from scientists and witnesses to somebody who is giving their interpretation especially through a comic book. You know, it's always treated in kind of like a, I don't know, juvenile kind of knee-jerk reaction to comic books. But you also have to look at it as part of the fun and the mythology, which of course is part of the Mothman. You know, it's kind of like, you can make fun of Dracula, you know, it's just some, you know, fictitious book and movie and stuff like that. But it does have its origin in Vlad the Impaler and stakes through the heart and religious beliefs. And it all comes from certain real things that happened in history. And somebody put it all together and, you know, made a fun, interesting story about. So you just have to accept the fact as a viewer of this documentary that, okay, we're just switching gears a little bit and we're looking at, you know, some of the fun imagery and the things that this whole idea of a Mothman has begotten.
That's true. And the other interesting thing it makes me think of is, you know, people often say, like, why is it called the Mothman? Well, the Mothman's name comes from at the time of all of these sightings, there was like a Batman comic book where there was a character called Mothman in one of the issues. And so people started calling it Mothman because there was that pop culture correlation back then. So it is kind of interesting, you know, my original, I guess, reluctance or just concern that like, oh, you know, I don't want to take away anything of the kind of investigative credence of the film by, you know, people judging Chad as like, well, why are we interviewing this guy? Again, like when you get to know Chad, you go, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. You know, he's not just kind of throwing together slapping a story together. He had really, I mean, he helped me so much in terms of people that he had interviewed or just, you know, through his process. He had done his comic book prior to the film. And so he already kind of started on what I needed to do, which was track down people, interview people, get source material, you know, find newspaper clippings. And, you know, he was a huge help to the production, not just in his interview, but just with the connections that he was willing to kind of give me. Anastasia, you and I went out to West Virginia because it was like the Mothman Festival is in its like infancy. And I think Jeff Walmsley had said, well, why don't you guys come out to the festival and just check it out? And so when we went there, Chad was one of the first people we had met. I remember he was under one of those tents. The Mothman Festival early on was like 10 tents in the center square.
I think the first time we went there, it was the second year that they were doing the Mothman Festival.
I think you're right.
It was early. It was early. Yeah. And I just remember there was like 10 tents under the center square of like people that were just, there to talk about Mothman and, share books and stories. And Chad was like one of those people. And I remember having a good conversation with him. He also stood out as like, you knew he wasn't from the town.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like just the way going back to what we talked about in an earlier episode about accents and stuff, Chad is not from far away, but he's also not from like right there in the middle of that town. So I do know that we also connected with him on a level of being a little bit of an outsider trying to do something local because he had already gone through that experience and had some success. I do also remember, Chad's no sucker in the sense that like, he's worked in media. And so there were times I would try to interview him and go down a series of questions. And he knew that I was trying to get him to like say certain things. He's like, no, I don't know that or believe that. So I'm not going to do it. You know what I mean? Like in terms of how you approach an interview. Which I value about him, that he did not want to comment on things that he felt were outside of his area of expertise. And we interviewed him in that beautiful old movie theater. And again, it goes back to like what we talked about in the other episode where, okay, we have a scientist talking about the ecological disaster in the wildlife area. So we're going to go out there. Chad is a little more connected to the pop culture element of Mothman. So I remember we decided to film him in that beautiful old movie theater.
We had access to it. And that was the whole thing. I use this shoot as an example when I talk about production, about like, you could do anything. You can go anywhere. You can park anywhere. People were very giving, very generous with their time and their locations. We used people's vintage cars and their front lawns. We used people's homes. We used the street, the middle of the street, with running cables across it. And they didn't mind. The cops didn't stop us. It was, it was one of the perfect examples of where you should shoot in this country. There
was an issue with the theater, though. I remember we were 4 minutes late. It was exactly 4 minutes late, and the owner was locking up because we were 4 minutes late.
Yeah, he was upset with us. That's right. He was upset with us.
It was no joke. It was 4 minutes because I looked at my watch. I'm like, we were supposed to be here 4 minutes ago.
I do remember him saying something like, 9 o'clock's 9 o'clock. You're here at 9:04. And we're like, okay. Like,
yeah, it was
where
bizarre.
do you have to be?
Yeah.
Nowhere.
Well, for a place that moves so slowly, that surprises me.
I do remember that. And I remember it was also quite warm in there, I think. I don't think there was, because it was non-operational. There wasn't air conditioning. There wasn't plumbing. Plumbing. But there wasn't enough electricity. There was enough electricity to get a really nice look. And I do also, it's funny, I remember probably in the raw interview, in between takes, you're going to hear me yelling at Justin, who, Justin was like our youngest crew member, our always sleeping in, always slightly intoxicated, probably dysfunctional, but good person, crew member. And I just remember always like having to yell at him, like, because the thing is, he's hiding in the background, fanning smoke up. And, you have to always assume like he's probably going to pass out and fall asleep or something because he's been up the night before partying or doing something. And so there's probably moments in this interview where I'm just like, smoke.
And had you been down there already before we made our trip to film?
We went like once.
No, was that for the film festival?
We were just,
the Mothman Festival?
We had this kind of like loose idea of like, oh, this would make for a good documentary.
What brought you down there?
I randomly saw the movie by accident.
Mothman Prophecies.
Yeah. And then at the end, when it was like based on real events, I'm like, oh man, that's interesting. So then I read the book, which I'd never heard of. And then I just remember thinking, oh, this would make for, like, there was so much in the book that didn't make the movie. And I just thought, oh, that'd be a good doc. And then I think we started to just reach out. Then I found Walmsley's book. At the time, there was only Mothman Prophecies and Walmsley's resource book. And so I tracked him down, had a conversation with him. He invited us to come out to the first, Mothman Festival, like, or one of the early ones.
Yeah, yeah.
And we did that. And then it just I just kind of
I don't
happened.
know. It spiraled from there. Did we stay at the Low Hotel when we went there?
No, we stayed in Hurricane, West Virginia.
So
and we drove.
So you were there in 2005?
Yeah.
I don't remember the date.
No, I mean, we shot this in the spring, I think, of 2000. I think it was May of 2006.
One of us had our birthday there. So was it the spring?
That's got to be Matt. It's got to be Matt. Because we shot another film in July and August.
Okay.
And so the feature.
Yeah.
So we had to, I know that we were fitting that in. We were doing a lot of pre-production for that feature and trying to fit in this, how many weeks? 3 weeks?
Yeah, we were there for about a month in West Virginia.
Trying to fit that in a time that we can shoot this and then go back to the production. So it was a busy year.
One other thing I do remember about Chad is that, he was very gracious and let us use all of his comic book art from his works in the movie, which, again, at the time, it was a different time. There was just not access. There was no AI. You couldn't just generate Mothman images. Like, I would have had to have hired a CG person, which would have cost me thousands of dollars. And we did kind of make the decision back then not to do prosthetics or monsters or anything. We wanted to keep it very just vague and kind of broad in terms of how we represented Mothman. But we did also take from his comics and use them in the film, which it just worked. Honestly, it was just whatever resource we had available, we used. And it was nice to have that.
Absolutely. And the thing is, when you hear all these people who are describing something, what they saw, you have to have some sort of visual representation for the audience in the film to realize their description. Like, even if it's comic book stuff, even if it's, a sketch artist from the police department or something like that, you have to have a visual representation of their description, or it's almost like a punchline. I mean, a joke with no punchline. You have to do that. And he was able to provide all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Chad's art, the artwork from Chad's comic books was a real welcome contribution to the film. And it was a nice callback to the original naming of the Mothman creature, which, its origin was coming from the Batman comic book. I do remember it was a very long interview, but a good interview. And Chad touched on a lot of the different subjects. We used him as one of those people who kind of transcended just not one topic, but all of them, because in his comic books, he really touched on Men in Black, UFOs, aliens, everything. So I remember we did spend the time with Chad at length to get his opinion. And so I'm looking forward to revisiting his interview, and hopefully you enjoyed as well.
I'll give you a brief rundown, just some of the things to make the interview sound better, I guess, kind of just stuff like that. I'm going to ask you a bunch of different questions. If you don't know the answer to them or something, or it doesn't fall into what you know, just let me know and we'll skip it and go to the next one.
More smoke?
Yeah, you could just keep it going. Do it 3 intervals and then stop and then whatever. We'll tell you too, because we can't have it going while we're recording it, because they're going to hear it. Okay. All right. So the other thing is, when I ask you a question, my question is not going to be in the final piece. So if you can reiterate or restate my question in your answer, it makes it sound nicer.
Gotcha.
If where are you today? And you say movie theater. Later on, all I have is a movie theater. But if you say I'm in a movie theater today, it's like a complete sentence. So it kind of makes sense. I just got to find your questions.
What kind of what are you looking for?
Just be honest. I'm sure. I'm just going to go through the different subjects of, Mothman, Men in Black, Bridge, things like that. So just whatever comes naturally. You know what I mean? Whatever your natural answer is actually what I'm after.
Okay. Camera is speeding.
All right, Chad, first, just so I have it later, just tell me, your name and spell it for me.
Okay, sure. Chad Lambert, ChadLambert.
Okay, and then for a lot of times with an interview, you have a title like researcher, expert. Is there a certain title that you want me to put?
Comic book writer.
Okay, cool.
It's fine.
Okay, stop with the smoke. So first, just tell me about yourself a little bit, about the comic books and the writing, and how that's kind of, how you got into that, and then also how that's kind of made you an expert kind of on the subject of Mothman.
Right. I got into comic book writing about 5 years ago. Had always wanted to do it. Had always taken a character of mine called Possum at Large that I had done as a college newspaper strip. And for the last 10 years or so, I've wanted to develop that into a full-size book. So I knew that if I ever was crazy enough to go into comics, that would be the first thing I'd take with me. So we basically self-produced the comic in 2002, released it. First time out of the shoot, we got national distribution. We got an award nomination. We got good sales. And that was kind of the birth of the comic book fun for me.
Can you tell me, in regards to Mothman and this story of Point Pleasant, how the work that you've done in comics kind of, brought you to the story of Point Pleasant, but then also how it's made you kind of an expert on the subject because you've had to research quite a bit, I'm sure.
Right. I was originally drawn to Mothman because Mothman is a very visual idea. It's such an iconic image of the winged demon, and the demonology and the history of all that I thought it would be a perfect vehicle for a comic book. But at the time, I didn't have a story in mind for it. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that I started kind of forming ideas of what I wanted to do and how I would adapt that into the folklore of the Mothman. The biggest challenge for me was it had to be historically accurate. The film version was, as a movie, a great movie. As an adaptation of a piece of work, not so good. So my goal was to make this pitch perfect accurate in every way possible. And I actually started doing that before I had a story.
Great. So that's perfect. And a lot of times what I'll do too is I'll ask you kind of what it sounds like a weird question, but it means what I'm going to probably do later is piece together a few of your answers together.
Absolutely.
So that's why it might sound weird.
No problem.
So that was perfect. The one element that I want to add to that, all of that, is that, you've kind of become, like I said, an expert to a degree in this subject. So can you just tell me a little bit about, in doing my research to prepare for the books, to make them historically accurate, I kind of, I don't know, unknowingly or whatever, but just, kind of, it turns out you're kind of, now kind of a well-versed in the subject of Mothman. That.
Right. Okay. Let me think about this a minute. Okay. In researching for the book, I found after about 6 months of reading books, going to the library, looking at police reports, looking at eyewitness accounts, that the story started forming itself through the research. Obviously, in this type of research, there's inconsistencies, there's falsehoods. Since it became such a pop culture phenomenon a few years ago, a lot of it's tainted now with mass media interest and people wanting to be on television. So it was difficult to get the research I wanted. But in finding the research actually started driving the story.
Smoke. Oh, we have to look at the light. If the light's not red, it doesn't work. You can come up for a minute. Look at the light. See the light on top that I showed you? And I said, this is the light that tells you how it works. Yeah, there's a red light there. Is it on? Red light.
There's a light underneath the handlebar.
No, yeah, right on top, on the top of the thing. Next to the button you push. Okay, so you have to wait till that turns on. That means you can use it. Just give it a couple minutes. It needs to reset. So don't press the button until it's red. All right, just let me know when it's red. I'm trying to think what the word is. Because a lot of people kind of you were at the festival last year, and a lot of people kind of come to you for okay, what happened with this?
Right.
So, one thing I'm trying to get to is that, kind of is it weird that kind of in kind of just telling the story, now you've kind of become a kind of a prominent figure in it now, where it's kind of, people come to you for, questions about the facts because your work was so truthful to the kind of what was going on. That's kind of,
okay. I see what you mean. Okay.
Just wait for the smoke.
Sure.
And also just, if when that happened, kind of when did you realize that, in kind of doing this project, it's made you...
Okay, smoke it.
Same thing with me. It's since I've done this project, so many people have emailed me and asked me they automatically...
Again, hold the smoke.
Tell me a little bit about how it kind of writing your comic books based on Mothman, it's almost made you like a prominent figure or almost like an expert in the field of Mothman. People kind of come to you for knowledge.
Okay. Well, I'm a journalist by training, so I applied my background in news gathering into this project. So it basically was easy for me to do and easy for me to get all the information. And, I sort of unknowingly became a shepherd for, all things Mothman just because I did research. I'm not necessarily, an expert on Mothman, but because I spent so much time reading it as a hobby and as an interest, I can very conversationally talk about it. I can, kind of explain things that are a little easier to explain than somebody who is a researcher.
I want to ask you about the TNT plant. It's kind of a specific question. I'm not sure how much you know about it. But do you know anything about, the TNT plant, there were harmful chemicals found that had been leaked out of these igloos and gotten into McClintock Wildlife Preserve. Without getting into Mothman at all, can you just tell me, do you know about that aspect of that area, about this kind of chemical spill that happened there?
The only thing I know is it's still being watched by the EPA very closely.
But you know that, for someone, if I had no idea that there was a chemical spill, can you just tell me, even if it's really general, just tell me kind of what happened, that, the igloos, that there was chemicals manufactured there. And, I guess from what I understand, it was kind of unknown that for a while, some chemicals have been leaking into the environment, just as if I had no idea. It's just for people who kind of, what I'm trying to do with this too, is anyone who's never seen Mothman, it's not like you have to know some of the story to understand the film. So it's
right.
kind of like trying to educate people on the whole story. So
gotcha.
For someone who has no idea, tell me a little bit about the TNT plant in terms of the chemical spills. What happened there?
Okay. The background on the TNT area has always been sort of mysterious because it's top secret. We know that they manufactured war munitions during World War II. There had been rumors that there had been accidents there, that they were experimenting with explosives that we didn't know about, with sort of higher grade chemicals that were unknown to us. And allegedly, quite a bit of that stuff had seeped out into the environment. And I know that the TNT area has been an EPA strong spot for many, many years. So it's hard to tell what was out there, what was contaminated, and what the effects have been because it's still being studied.
Are you familiar with the incident? It's called the Newell Partridge incident with the bandit. We had talked about that before. Remember that story?
Right.
For someone who's never heard that story, can you tell me what happened there?
Okay. A couple of nights before the main sightings of Mothman, a farmer named Newell Partridge.
Sorry. This is the guy whose name was wrong. It's always been reportedly wrong that his name is Newell. It's Merle. So I'm going to correct this and use it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay,
So
no, that's fine.
call him Merle. Okay.
Okay, that's interesting. It is Partridge, though.
Yeah. It's what? He's a trucker, but he lived on like a farm. But his name is Merle. So that's one thing. It's like when I said to him yesterday, he's like, that's not my name. And I'm like, dude, it's every book I've ever read. That's
Yeah,
your name.
totally.
Yeah. Smoke some more? A little more? No. All right, stop. Okay. So tell me about the Merle
Partridge. Okay. A couple of nights before the main sightings of Mothman, when this whole thing launched, a guy on a farm named Merle Partridge was watching television late one night, was dozing in and out, and his TV goes on the fritz, and electrical stuff starts going crazy. So he hears his dog barking outside, and he goes out and he sees these lights, and this is officially the first UFO sightings in the area. He sees the red lights. He stares at them for a few seconds, apparently goes back in the house, doesn't hear the dog barking anymore. Later goes out to find the dog, and reports were that he saw dog tracks to a certain point and they stopped. So the dog was never found. No one really knows what happened to the dog. And apparently he shows up later dead.
Dog. Yeah. We're gonna it had been mixed up a little bit about what Merle had witnessed, whether it was UFO, if it was right. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? So there's a little bit of confusion throughout some of the years. Some reports, some people have reported that Merle had witnessed the Mothman that night, but it appears more so that what he had witnessed was kind of red lights, more of a craft. But it's easy to see where kind of the story has gotten twisted a bit, where a lot of people have taken he saw these red lights moving. A lot of people thought, well, maybe that was the red eyes of the Mothman.
Right. Okay. A lot of reports had said that Merle saw Mothman. A lot of the reports everywhere was Mothman. But what people didn't realize is the UFO activity during the entire year of this was far more rampant than seeing a creature. So a lot of times lights in the sky were falsely reported as, glowing red eyes from a winged man. The ratio of UFO sightings to Mothman sightings in newspaper reports were at least 10 to 15 to 1, just guesstimating. There were far more UFO stories that I came across in my research than Mothman. Mothman seemed to be a byproduct of everybody seeing lights in the sky for a 13-month period.
Great. And picking up after kind of the Merle Partridge bandit goes missing, can you tell me why that story is kind of important, has relevance? And, it's being that the next night, the night of the big reported sighting that kind of blows all the media, gets everyone, attention here, is that because part of the four couples, part of their story is that after they're pursued by Mothman, they kind of pass a large dead dog on the side of the road that fits the description of Merle Partridge's dog that went missing.
Well, the story of Mothman is one of coincidence, is one of unexplainable things happening in sequences of order that certainly don't make any sense. So obviously Merle Partridge and his missing dog relating to the police reports of the Mallets and the Scarberries seeing the dead dog certainly can't be rejected outright. We do not know, or we still don't know what these were, what these connections were, but the disappearance of the dog, the reappearance of the dog during the sightings can't be ignored.
Great. I'm going to ask you the similar question in a different way.
Smoke, please. Let me just change my angle, but I'm going to move the camera closer, okay?
Yeah. Ready? There you go.
You're going to have to sit down and look at that, but just flat.
Yeah, it's cool. There's no legs yet. You good? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you a similar question. And then I'll tell you where I'm trying to go with it. And then I'll ask you a question. Where I'm trying to go is that, there's a correlation between these stories, that they're not single stories alone, but on the collective whole, that's kind of what this whole project is about. That there's all these myths and legends come out of this, but on the collective whole, it looks like there's some correlation there. So I'm trying to show, that between Merle Partridge and the Scarberry and Mallett's story. So, I think let me ask you this way. Why do people consider Merle Partridge's sighting with his dog missing significant?
I think Merle Partridge's sightings is very significant because it sort of heralded 13 months of very bizarre things to come for this small little town that are still unexplained to this day, that are part of a whole that I don't think we've seen the end of yet.
People, most people around town, as soon as you ask them, they go, well, what's the importance of Merle Partridge's, thing with Bandit? And we're like, well, it's important because the next day his dog was found dead. It's almost like fact to them. Right. We don't have to get into that, but just, on the collective whole of these people, in their opinion, why is the Partridge sighting, of significance, just in correlation with the next night?
Okay. The Partridge, let me try it again. The Partridge sighting was significant because it really brought Mothman into being, even though at the time no one realized it. Bandit was certainly found dead, according to reports. Whether it was the dog that the Mallets and the Scarberry saw the night of the chase, we don't know, but it certainly brought a beginning to what was about to happen in the coming weeks.
Sure. Okay. What the Mothman looks like? Like, give me kind of like a laundry list of physical characteristics. You can doesn't have to be like a formal sentence. Just list for me. When people say, what does it look like? What comes up?
Gotcha. Mothman is everything from glowing red eyes, which seems to be the most common trait, to man-like bird, to 6-foot wingspan, giant owl, mutated sandhill crane. What is it?
And in terms of just like if you saw Mothman, for these people that claim to have seen it, they saw Mothman there. It's like, if you were kind of describing, just the physical characteristics of it, like faceless, red eyes. I don't know what color the feathers were, but scales, whatever it was. Can you run through some of the list of those things?
Sure. Mothman was 6 to 8 feet tall, gray, very humanoid-like, had distinct legs, had distinct arms. Some reports were headless, more like an owl. 6 to 8 foot wingspan, flies without noise, glides without noise, hovers. It's very, very open.
Okay. Perfect. Tell me, the Mothman sighting that occurred November 15th, 1966. It's the Roger and Linda Scarberry and Stephen Mary Mallett story. Can you, as if I've never heard that story, can you tell me, if you want to throw the date in, it can. It's November 15th, 1966.
Right.
But just tell me that story as if you're telling it to me for the first time.
Gotcha. Okay, let me set this up. Okay. In mid-November 1966, two couples, the Mallets and the Scarberries, were out joyriding, parking, whatever, at the TNT area, when one of them saw something out of the corner of their eye that resembled a man crouching behind one of the buildings. There was immediate fear when they saw it. They saw it again. And then apparently the couples took off out of the TNT area and headed down Route 62 at 100 plus miles an hour with this thing chasing them. And it chased them all the way into the city limits, apparently sat like a bird cooped outside the city limits as they went into town to report to the sheriff.
Can you tell me what happened
Smoke?
after? Yeah. Let me get some smoke going behind you. And then my next question is, what happened after that? Not on that night. As far as I understand, they reported it to the police. Were they believed? You can keep going. Do like 3 spurts of it, okay? Smoke? Yeah. Was it believed? A thing that always seems to recur in my research has been like, it was never doubted by the police right away because it's kind of like the fear was kind of stamped on their face.
Right.
It's kind of like they didn't need to convince them because the kids were kind of fucking terrified.
Right.
So a police officer escorted them back to the location and nothing was there. But when one thing I always hear is that, when he switches on his police radio and it goes kind of haywire. I don't know if you remember that, but kind of weird noises come over the police radio. And it's kind of significant. It's kind of the same kind of weird noises that's heard by Merle Partridge when a TV explodes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, was it Deputy Halstead? Is that?
I believe so. I don't have that.
Okay. I was trying to remember that.
I think so.
Because there was Sheriff Johnson and Deputy Halstead. I'm not going to mention them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So, tell me what happened then.
Okay. The couples report this to the police. They seem to be believed right away. Obviously they were terrified. Their fear was genuine, whether or not their story was, enough to where a police officer went back out to the TNT with them. They didn't see anything, but there were disturbances in radio signals during their visit, which was really the only evidence of anything unusual going on. And reports have said that it was similar disturbances to what, Merle had on his television the night Bandit disappeared.
You got a good voice, Chad. I can see how you were in radio.
Broadcasting?
You got a good voice. You're going, no, bad news for the Cincinnati Reds. I can hear it. So talk to me a bit about the 4 young teenagers, November 15th, just 2 days after Merle Partridge's dog goes missing. They see a large dead dog on the side of the road. And, tell me how that's significant because most people automatically think, well, that's Merle's dead dog.
Okay. I think that was Steve Mallett that saw it.
Okay.
It wasn't Linda Scarberry. It was someone else in the car. Whoever was driving, I think it was Steve Mallett driving.
I'm not sure. I don't know, honestly.
Okay.
You can tell me if you want.
All right. I'm not sure if it's true. I can't remember. As these couples were driving 100 plus miles down the highway, as this beast or this winged thing was chasing them, the driver of the car noticed a dead dog on the side of the road, which was significant because a lot of people thought it may have been Merle's dead dog. But the fact that it was a dead domesticated animal out on a country road, I think is very significant.
So tell me a bit about, there are some obvious connections and correlations between some of these sightings. Even before the Partridge sighting, there's a sighting in a cemetery in Clendenin where there are people digging a grave. I don't know if you remember this one. There's grave diggers who actually spot what they say clearly was like a flying man and buzzing through the trees kind of thing. that happens, and then like it's like, you know, soon after that, it's Merle Partridge's sighting. Soon after that, it's the TNT plant chase. Can you tell me a little bit about that, and where it kind of seems that these are all kind of pieces of the same big kind of mysterious puzzle here?
I don't know a lot about the cemetery.
Okay.
I had read it, but it wasn't. I didn't focus on that for what I was doing.
Yeah, it was. There's not much. There's not a whole lot on it. It's just that, you know, there are 4 people digging a grave in Clendenin, and they report a flying man in the trees.
Yeah, let's skip that.
It's, you know, that happened, then Partridge happened, and then the Scarberries happened. So it's kind of like those are just 3 examples I'd used.
Right.
What I'm trying to get at is that, you know, you hear this, you hear this, you hear this. You know, it's this day, it's Monday, then it's Tuesday, then it's Thursday, then it's Friday, and it's kind of like in the same geographic area. I was just trying to name a few incidents.
Well, I relate that back to, I go back to as far as, you know, people who had religious experiences. You know, everything is related to the same characteristics, whether they see a vision of an angel, whether they think they see God, whether they see demons. It's all based on, you know, the theories of demonology. That's a little high level.
No, that's fine. That's actually fine. You can go there. And with that, just conclude with a little bit, you know, where that kind of is an example of, you know, just that within all of these stories, there are some little underlining connections. And that's why people kind of don't consider these random acts. They consider them one kind of big, unusual event.
Right.
So you start, same thing, just conclude a little bit with that.
Okay. I don't consider any of this random. I think there's a connection throughout history. You know, Mothman was drawn on cave walls by cavemen, although it was interpreted as something else, or it was supposedly symbolic of something else. Anyone who has a religious epiphany or has anything, it's always something with wings, something floating above, you know, whether, you know, Christian, whether demonic, it's all the same. And I think all this stuff relates in some way that we can't understand to Mothman, events that have happened and events that will happen.
Great. Now specifically with the events of Point Pleasant, tell me a little bit about some of the things from the Point Pleasant story that have some of those kind of underlining elements where it's kind of like, you know, Cornstalk, there's a supposed curse, and, you know, he's Native American. Native American culture, birds are very symbolic. They're, you know, symbols of different things. You know, also Native Americans, there's thunderbirds, which are part of their myths and legends and spirituality. And then it's kind of like, you know, if people think, well, if, you know, a curse manifested by a Native American is going to happen, it's going to be manifested in something like that. When is it a coincidence that's just symbolic that it's a flying, you know, entity?
Right.
You know, the red eyes, the red glows of the UFOs, the, you know, Mothman supposedly spotted near the bridge falls. You know, tell me about some of these stories in Point Pleasant.
Point Pleasant's history was very odd to begin with. So it sort of was a good point for Mothman and the theories of Mothman and the connections throughout history to be made, in that, you know, Chief Cornstalk supposedly cursed the land. You know, the Indians, when the Indians settled in the Ohio Valley, the Indians didn't settle in West Virginia. They stayed away from West Virginia. There was something haunted about that their spiritual sides didn't want to be on that land. And no one really understands why that was, but they chose not to settle in that part of the state. So I think the Indians knew something. I think the Cornstalk legends, the Cornstalk tales have truth and have relevance to Mothman because of what their spiritual beliefs were, what their symbols were. You know, the Garuda, the Thunderbird, these are things of Indian legend that have transformed how we think of things in terms of visual, iconic images. So to have a Mothman close enough to those descriptions appear in the 60s, I think is totally relatable to what happened back in the 1700s.
Right. And if you talk to like the kind of average Point Pleasant citizen, you know, they'll tell you if they're a believer of this. Some people just don't believe in anything. But if they're a believer of this, they'll say, well, yeah, it's all the same thing. It's not like the UFOs are different and the Mothman. Can you tell me, like, you know, you talk to the average kind of Point Pleasant resident, and they'll tell you these are not single events. These are all events that are different but related.
I think no matter what you believe Mothman was or is, it all relates somehow to the history of this town. You know, whether it was a mutated bird from chemicals, whether it was a giant owl, whatever you believe it was, it relates back to the Indian spirituality that was in this region from the Shawnee Indians in the 1700s. It all connects. I just don't think we were given clear pieces of the puzzle to understand what it was, but there was definitely something there.
You asked us kind of the everyday Point Pleasant resident on Main Street, what the deal is. They'll tell you that these are all accounts related to a larger picture that we don't know. These aren't just random acts of coincidence. There's something to it. We don't know what, but there seems to be something to it because there's evidence that supports it.
Right.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I think you ask anybody in Point Pleasant, they believe in the trifecta. They believe in Cornstalk, Mothman 66, Bridge Fall 67. But there hasn't been anything beyond that to keep connecting those pieces of the puzzle. But generally, everyone believes that there is some relation through coincidences, through sequences of events that maybe we didn't receive the messages from in proper sequence to understand what all that was. There's no denying that happened.
And the fact is that if you look at the bottom, at the kind of the end of the day, you look at, all of the facts and evidence with all these stories. There is some, I'm not sure of evidence, but there is some factual information there that gives you some room to think, well, yeah, it didn't make connections, that there are things that relate to these stories, even if they're separated by hundreds of years.
Well, you go into the core connection. You talk about Cornstalk cursing the land, cursing the people, cursing everything that he was over a belief of his, that apparently he was a powerful prophet of some kind, or that he was a shaman. And the fact that Point Pleasant has essentially been a town of bad luck, of bad things happening. Plants close, bridges collapse. It's a depressed area that has been depressed since it was formed. To me, that's a very vague but very true coincidence that lends itself to this story.
Tell me, after the 4 kids are attacked by Mothman November 15th, the police officer that night escorts them back to the scene of the attack. Tell me what happened. Did the authorities believe their story?
Okay. After the police checked out the Mallet and Scarberry story, I don't know necessarily that the police believed it, and I don't know necessarily that the newspapers believed it, but the fact that the newspapers printed it and the fact that the police followed up on so many leads over the next several months proves to me that there was enough of a basis of what was going on, that it was believed more on a high level that something was out there, whether it was extraterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial, whether it was just people out there that weren't supposed to be out there. I think there was a general belief that something was going on that merited attention, because you never see UFO stories in small town newspapers. That, to me, gave credibility to the story.
Great. And that's one thing that's kind of interesting about the Scarberry and Mallet case, is that no one ever seems to doubt them much. The police, as far as in my research, the police, one thing I think that they took the time to go back there and look. I don't think they were humoring them. From what I understand, it's kind of like the proof was in the validity of how scared they were. They had one police officer, I think, was quoted as saying it was kind of like the fear was kind of stamped on their face.
Right.
So I think, can you just talk a little bit about that? That's probably why they took them a little serious. They went out there and investigated that night a little bit. They weren't just humoring them, but it was clear that they had witnessed something credible enough to scare the life out of them. Right. They were legitimately scared. Can you tell me about that?
Okay. I think the police took this story seriously enough to, chase down leads and look at it. Because in a small town like Point Pleasant and small towns across the United States, this isn't something you go to the police or the newspaper to draw attention to yourself. Small towns are very, salt of the earth, church-going communities. To bring something like this into public attention would cause far more ridicule than positive attention toward yourself. So my feeling was always the fact that the Mallets and the Scarberries did this, and the fact that so many other people came public with these stories, gives a lot of validity to what was happening.
And can you tell me a little bit about the Scarberries and Mallets? they're not really doubted by the police. And from as far as I can understand, they're not really doubted by people who hear their story. And I think that's pretty telling. It's like, they've got a pretty extraordinary story that they're telling. And right off the bat, not a whole lot of people are even questioning it.
Right.
And can you talk a bit about, I think the reason for that is their reputation already as good people. And also just that there was reports of, from the night, just a legitimacy in the fear, the physical, emotional state they were in. That lent to why I think maybe this was accepted right off the
Gotcha.
bat.
Okay. I think their story was believable because these were normal kids. For all intents and purposes, these were good kids, clean kids, no records. They weren't out at the TNT drinking. They weren't out causing trouble. These were just regular, normal people who were scared to death about something, which led a lot to the believability of the story. If this were today and it were, a bunch of goth kids out smoking dope and go to the police with a story of a giant bird, it doesn't have the credibility of, some backwoods, quiet, keep to yourself people coming to the police this terrified and having such a clear story that never changed over the next 30 or 40 years, that there is definite credibility and definite believability to what happened out there.
Smoke, please.
Smoke up, Johnny. You know what we could have done? We could have threw a red gel over that. No?
Yeah, they'll kill you. They were speed.
Okay, next question. Can you tell me, how did this incident on November 15th, 1966 change Point Pleasant forever?
Prior to November of 1966, Point Pleasant was like every other small town in this part of the tri-state. No one paid any particular attention to it. And all of a sudden, they're thrust into a national spotlight with stories of UFOs, with stories of winged demons. And they became, on one hand, sort of a punchline on the national stage. But on a regional stage, it became very intriguing with what was going on. There were reporters here in droves for weeks at a time trying to cover all the stuff that was going on.
Can you tell me, I'm trying to describe the Mothman a bit, but specifically his eyes. Can you tell me about the eyes of the Mothman?
The eyes of the Mothman seem to be the most common in description, that they are deep red, that they're glowing, that they're mesmerizing, they're entrancing, that they, put you in some type of hypnotized state of fear, of like you're looking at something that you're not supposed to be looking at, that something's not right. And it inflicts such an emotional response.
So, before Mothman spotted, TNT plants kind of this welcome spot to go fishing, to go hunting, to kind of drag race at night, to kind of hang out. It's like a chill spot. It's kind of welcome. Can you tell me, after Mothman spotted, what's it like at the TNT plant now? People went there looking for the Mothman, specifically. Hunters waited for it, tried to catch it, kill it, shoot it. And then also other people, they never went back there ever again because they were terrified of it.
Right.
Can you tell me about life in the TNT plant after Mothman spotted?
Okay. After the Mothman sightings, the TNT plant became a giant carnival for a couple of months. This was something the police certainly did not welcome. They had to have extra force up there because there were kids up there. There were people with loaded guns up there. There were hunters. People were out there trying to see Mothman, trying to see UFOs. And seeing UFOs became such a common thing that it sort of became the event that you drank some beer, you went out to the TNT plant, you watched some lights, and you went home.
It was a better entertainment than like a movie, right? Now people had demons and UFOs to go look at.
Yeah, before Mothman, people went to bed at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. Now they're out on hilltops at midnight, shining flashlights at lights in the sky, trying to get them to flash back,
After Mothman spotted more frequently, there's some professors at universities nearby who tried to pass the sightings off as a sandhill crane, rare species of bird. For those who witnessed Mothman firsthand, was that an insult? And explain why this couldn't have been a sandhill crane. Most people I talked to, these are kind of outdoors people. These are people who know the wilderness, people who know what a sandhill crane is. And
Right.
they're the same people reporting Mothman. And for them, I think it was kind of insulting because it's something they know about. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
The sandhill crane theory out of West Virginia University was very, very offensive to people who had sighted Mothman, who had seen it, who had described it to the police. In theory, it makes a lot of sense to someone who doesn't live here, someone who doesn't know the people very well, that it does have red patches. It can be 6 feet wide in its wingspan. It can be a certain height. But, people around here hunt. People around here know what birds and owls, and they know species of things that, people in the city certainly do not know. And for them to just throw a sweeping theory out and sort of scoff at what everyone else had seen was very insulting to the people of Point Pleasant.
Good. Can you tell me a little bit about life after a Mothman sighting? Some say that after the after effects were worse than the sighting itself. Can you tell me about what these people are talking about? A lot of them are talking about never being able to sleep again. A lot of people just moved out of this community, never came back who saw this thing. People were kind of scarred for life. The emotional kind of trauma afterward, a lot of time is described as being worse than actually seeing the Mothman. Can you tell me about that?
The effects of the contactees of the Mothman have varied greatly over the years. Generally, it's bad. They suffer sleeplessness. They suffer hallucinations. They suffer nightmares they fear are going to come true. Many were visited by the men in black. Many had phone trouble. Many were scared. Several moved from the area. A lot of the Mothman witnesses to this day won't talk about it for fear it will come back, that it served as some kind of warning to not talk about it.
And also, I think there were even some physical after effects, right? Like some burns to the skins and eyes and things like that. Can you tell me about some of the actual, aside from the emotional and trauma, some of the physical after effects?
Sure. After seeing Mothman, a lot of the contactees contracted conjunctivitis, which is essentially a highly elevated pink eye that's caused from some type of radiation. Many had sunburns in December, which in West Virginia can't happen in the 1960s. This was years before tanning beds or any of that stuff came along. So to have parts of their body sunburned, to have these radiation burns, to have eyes swollen shut, to have all these physical, bizarre things happen to them, really scared a lot of people, far worse than the sighting of the monster itself did.
Right. Are you familiar with the Marcella Bennett case?
Yes.
Oh, you are? Okay, great. So it's November 16th, 1966, I believe, is the Marcella Bennett incident. I'm not sure, actually, because I'm not saying it's maybe that's why it's
The next day.
Anyway, it's the next day, I guess. Yeah, November 16th, 1966. Marcella Bennett story. Can you tell me about this? As if I've never heard it. Tell me what happened. What's the story of that?
Okay, now she was living out there.
Yeah.
Was she living out there, or were they visiting someone who lived?
She was visiting some.
That's right.
And she's, it's the thing where she's visiting a friend. I think the friend's Ralph Thomas, if I remember correctly, and he lives out by the TNT plant, one of the only homes near the igloos.
Yes.
And she's visiting him, and she sees her car kind of awakes this like sleeping creature who gets up, and it scares her so much she drops her infant child,
Tina.
Yeah. And this doesn't happen, seconds. It's less minutes long. This account, and it's right in front of her. Tell me about what happened to Marcella Bennett.
Okay. The night after the first Mothman sighting, Marcella Bennett was visiting a friend out at the TNT area. At the time, there were homes in that vicinity. And she was visiting a friend, and as she was driving along, she apparently awakened something that looked like it had been sleeping. She thought it was an animal at first, but similar to the previous reports, she saw the red eyes. She saw it come toward her. She got out of the car. The fear of seeing this froze her in such absolute fear that she dropped her infant daughter, Tina, and fell to the ground. And, she said in later interviews that she was aware she had dropped the child. She was aware that she was laying on the child, and that the child was probably dead, but she was frozen in such fear that she could not move. And this lasted for minutes.
Right. Two aspects of the story I want to focus on and point out that I think is significant is that in Marcella Bennett case, the woman is so terrified that one, she drops her child, and when she comes face to face with the monster, she drops her child, and two, the incident itself lasts extremely long, and those are two kind of uncanny parts of a story. Usually, you see something, it's like 4 seconds long, it's like a blur in the sky. This is a woman that, not only clearly sees something, scary enough to drop her newborn baby, but also it lasts minutes long. I mean, if I remember correctly, what happens next is they go inside the house, lock the doors, and this thing pursues them and is looking through the windows. It's on their front porch. This lasts an extremely long time.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Okay. Eventually, Mrs. Bennett is able to, get up, grab her daughter, and run into this house. And they run in the house, they lock the doors, they lock the windows, and this creature is on the porch. It is looking through the windows. It doesn't appear aggressive, but it appears curious and appears persistent. And to me, this was one of the key Mothman sightings because of how long it lingered. Generally these things are seconds, maybe a minute. They see it in the distance. Rarely is the creature this interested peripherally in something as minute as someone's house.
And actually, I didn't think about this before, but, I'd heard a lot of stories of Mothman being kind of related to a lot of stories with small children or babies, I don't know if pursuing them or going after them. But it's also kind of interesting because there are real stories of birds trying to pick up and grab small children.
Right.
Can you tell me, you don't have to go there if you don't want to, in terms of the reality of large birds actually attacking people, small people?
No, I didn't really come across a lot of that.
Okay.
Yeah. I had originally thought of that too, and I didn't see, there wasn't enough of a pattern. Yeah. And I never really related the correlation to blood.
Yeah, I don't buy that either.
They always talk about it chased a bloodmobile, that a lot of the female contactees happen to be on menstrual cycles. Yeah. I didn't buy that theory.
I don't buy that. There's too many accounts that don't fit that.
This podcast is a companion piece to the original feature-length documentary film from 2011 of the same title. If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to see the film that started it all by visiting www.eyesofthemothman.com.
In many cases, such as Marcella Bennett, you have a sighting of kind of an unbelievable apparition, monster, creature. Most often, it's one person who sees this thing. The sighting lasts seconds and it's over. Here, these sightings of Mothman are often, not just from Marcella Bennett, but others, they're often several feet away from the witness, like face to face with this thing. It lasts long periods of time, and it's not just one person sighting it. It's, 4 people together, kind of corroborating stories together where that can be backed up. And also, as sightings started to happen, they grew in number all over the immediate area. Can you tell me about this? How it's significant? Tell me about that happening, as if I don't know. But then also, it's clearly that's significant. It's face to face intrusions with this thing. It's lasting long periods of time. It's multiple sightings fitting those characteristics, and it's more than one person at a time seeing it. So these things can be kind of backed up and can be validated.
Right. Okay. After the Marcella Bennett, I can't say Marcella. It's fucked up. After the Marcella Bennett sightings, to me, that's when things really got credible. Because if people were seeing the exact same thing in the exact same way, that would tell me that it was a hoax or it was people trying to get attention. But it was different almost every time for a long period of time. It was, 3 people seeing it on a walk. It was, I'm sorry.
Sorry. What I'm trying to cover is that what makes these sightings unique as opposed to other kind of paranormal sightings across the world of other things, UFOs, monsters, shit like that, It's that, the points that I'm trying to cover is that they're almost like face to face sometimes intrusions. They're not like something in the sky and you're misinterpreting it. It's something, as clear as the hand in front of their face. It's 10 feet away. They could have hit it with a stone if they wanted to.
Right.
It's right in front of them. It's close proximity. It's groups of people seeing it. So the stories can be validated through, the testimony from all of them. And it's the fact that it's not just one event. It's, it's kind of like, it really, I think, lends to the credibility of the whole thing that all these things have happened. It's close sightings. It's groups of people together. It's honest people. And it's the stories like that keep going. It's multiple stories of all fitting those credible terms.
Right. Okay. I think what makes the Mothman sightings valid and what makes the Mothman sightings interesting is that this was a personal experience. This wasn't a group of people looking at a comet in the sky. This wasn't strange lights. This was a being of some kind interacting with you, interacting with another person, face to face, close up, in very personal situations, driving in a car, in your backyard, doing things inconspicuously before it notices you. It is as if you were intruding on something it was doing.
Good.
Smoke, please.
Smoke! This is what you get for being knowledgeable. You get a shitload of questions.
Mm-hmm.
No, you get a lot of questions.
Speed.
So, when all said and done, how many sightings are we talking about for Mothman and how long a period?
Okay. There were so many sightings of Mothman, both on the books and off the books, that there's no set number of who saw what and when, but it is definitely in the hundreds, which to me gives even more validity to what was going on over that period of time.
Can you tell me how long a period did people see this thing? How long did it last?
The Mothman sightings occurred roughly 13 months. There was obviously a huge concentration in November, December, January, prior to the UFO sightings for the rest of that year.
You know that Point Pleasant is not the only place that massive kind of paranormal winged creatures have been witnessed. There's been sightings in New Jersey, Texas, all over the globe. With that in mind, it kind of like lends to that the idea that there must be something to these incidents. The fact that we have similar stories happening kind of globally. I think. Tell me about that. Do you think these things kind of emerge? They have to. I think with that in mind, they kind of have to emerge from some truth. If in the fact that they're happening globally and there are similar characteristics in stories. Can you tell me about kind of the broad range of similar sightings happening around the world, and that does that lend some credibility to this? Does it show that maybe there is something to this?
All right. There have been so many sightings around the world prior to the events in Point Pleasant and after the events in Point Pleasant that it lends credibility to something is out there that we don't understand, that there are other forces at work, there are other things on this planet that are just beyond our comprehension. The Mothman or versions of the Mothman have shown up in Chernobyl prior to a disaster. People see 100 different variations. It used to fly over Coney Island 100 years ago and got descriptions that were vaguely similar to Mothman. But it lends me to believe that there is just something here that we don't understand.
Okay. If the incidents here were just Mothman, no UFOs, no bridge falling, nothing else, would people be more accepting of an explanation that's earthbound, like, say, a pterodactyl or a snail crane? But the fact that Mothman happened along with all these weird things, people automatically think it's of a paranormal origin. Do you think without, you take out the bridge, you take out the curse, you take out some of the UFOs, would people be more accepting of an earthbound explanation of Mothman?
Okay. I think had Mothman been the only element of the puzzle in Point Pleasant, had there been no bridge tragedy, had there been no UFOs, had there been no cornstalk or Indian backstory, I think it would have eventually just fizzled away or had been written off as a cryptozoological event rather than going into the realm of paranormal, the realm of extraterrestrial things. And I think that's why it holds up so well and people are still interested and people are still making pilgrimages to this small town to try and find out answers to questions I don't think can be answered.
I think it's funny, all the explanation. People often extraterrestrial involvement. And it's funny because actually, like when you look at the evidence, I think the reason that's the most widely accepted answer is because that's almost what the evidence on the whole supports.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about that? It's kind of ironic. I mean, it's like the weirdest possibility is kind of the most credible because that's kind of what the evidence seems to support.
You're saying the evidence supports more of the animal?
No, I think, most people believe the Mothman's, of an extraterrestrial origin. And I think that that's not far-fetched. I think that they're basing those conclusions on the evidence because the evidence seems to support that it was something that was not grounded in earthbound scientific explanation.
Right.
Can you tell me about that? It just defied kind of science a bit. So I think maybe that's why people do think it's extraterrestrial in origin because that's kind of, if you look at the evidence, it's almost what it seems to indicate.
Right.
And more so.
Okay. The evidence of Mothman certainly supports a otherworldly experience because, had a body surfaced, if there were so many of these Mothmen, eventually one of them would have died. One of them would have been shot. One of them would have succumbed to old age and we would have seen a body. But the fact that there was never physical evidence of a creature lends I'm sorry.
Okay. You can pick it up from where you left off.
Yeah.
No evidence, no physical evidence.
Yeah. The fact that there was no physical evidence of any kind lends to the belief that this came from somewhere other than where we are.
Is there enough evidence to kind of, take the next step where, it should no longer be a question of did it happen, but what happened? Because it's clear that something happened here that kind of breaks a lot of boundaries. Is it now time to kind of move forward? And if this is ever going to be solved, or if it's ever going to be kind of progressed, people are still kind of arguing over, did it happen? Is there enough evidence to support that, something did happen? Now it's time to figure out what it was and to go about that. So many people are still lingering on the argument over did it or did it not happen?
Definitely. Okay. I think there's enough evidence to support the fact that these things did happen. And it amazes me that 30 or 40 years later, that's still the argument. The facts are there. The facts have never changed. Nothing has happened since then to skew those facts. We have a basis of study. Let's start looking at why. Let's start looking at what and not if.
Right.
A lot more?
Yeah, I don't know. Can you just cut for a second? Sure. I'll be right back. I just want to see if this.
Because if you're covering Men in Black, that's obviously a good place to drop that in because my comic sort of threw out a very inadvertent theory on who they were.
Right. Is that a theory that you believe in yourself in terms of the story?
My belief is more that it was government.
Yeah. Okay. So that would be good to tie in there.
Because I hate government. And it just reeked of
cover up
government. But, my theory was a little more fun to think about.
Well, we're getting there soon in the next 5 questions.
Well, that's fine. I'm not rushing. I just didn't know what.
Yeah, no, that'd be good. No, that's good to know though. I mean,
because you asked me a couple starting out and I was a little stiff, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's cool. Sure. Okay. So the next question: many of the UFO cases and sightings that occur here Many of the UFO cases and sightings that occur here really kind of break the mold of the typical sighting. People were not just seeing lights in the sky, but actually coming into direct contact with solid working craft, even in broad daylight. Can you tell me about some of these incidents?
Okay. Many of the incidents in Point Pleasant were unique. Many of the sightings because they were so different than what people had been seeing. A lot of times it's the close encounters version. It's the lights in the sky. It's things like that. These lights were multiple. These lights were interacting. These lights were displaying certain colors on certain nights. You know, a lot of people around here still refer to their purple fields, that, you know, purple lights shone on Wednesdays. You know, there were patterns, there were things that were significant that made these very unique sightings that lend to the theory that these weren't just spaceships from another place watching us, that this was some attempt at contact, that this was some form of higher intelligence from wherever, just keeping an eye on us for a while.
And there were even sightings like during the daylight, people seeing craft, people seeing propellers, working parts, things like that. I mean, there's even stories of a guy, you know, driving down the road and he can't get past the road because there's a object there, an aeronautical object in the way, and it just floats up away in silence. Tell me about some of these daylight sightings.
Sure. A lot of the daylight sightings were very peculiar as well, because it was as if we were intruding on them, that they were here doing sort of blue collar tasks. You know, we would see ships in broad daylight. There was a woman that saw a ship hovering above her child's elementary school and saw someone sort of standing outside the ship as if taking a break, as if just doing rudimentary things. Someone reported seeing a steel building on a walk that he had never seen before, and he goes back hours later and there's no building. A lot of these things really got people thinking as to the origins of flying saucers and what they believed UFOs were prior to these sightings in 1966 and 1967.
When the UFO sightings started to grow up, when the smoke stay, when the I want to wait till it's up and ready. When the UFO sightings started to grow in number, what was the reaction of people? Was it like, okay, Mothman's kind of old news now and UFOs are in? Because it seemed like, even though UFOs were before Mothman kind of got all the press and then UFOs started to get later. So can you tell me about that? The UFO, was it kind of like, okay, great, now Mothman's kind of outdone by the UFOs and it just gets weirder?
Right. I think once the UFO sightings started, the interest in Mothman didn't really wane, but the volume of sightings were so high for the UFOs that was the talk of the town. There were so many, and there was such a divide of belief in them. You know, certain people, it was an event. Certain people, it was terrifying. But it just created an overall sense of discomfort and unease in the town that lasted all of 1967.
You remember the woman who's kind of a prominent figure in the story, Mary Hire, the reporter?
Oh, yeah.
People laid down some questions about her.
Sure.
Mary Hire, a shoulder to lean on for people and during these odd events. Can you tell me about the work playing a key role in this story?
Sure. Mary Hire was a huge part of the Mothman story, because in every small town, there's a gossip columnist, there's a local personality that has the credibility of the newspaper, and rightfully so. It's someone who lives here, someone who goes to church here, who is a part of the community. So when Mary Hire starts writing stories of Mothman and UFOs in her column, people took that as truth because she was credible. People believed her. Everyone knew her. So for her to report these stories, go after these stories, have experiences with these stories, I think really played a huge role in the believability in the town of what was going on.
And can you just tell me who she was? Tell me a little bit about her. She was a reporter of a newspaper, and she kind of had unintentionally become the person to go to, because she was kind of, I guess, just people knew they could go to her faith and it wouldn't be ridiculed.
Right. Mary was a reporter for the Athens Messenger, but had an office here in Point Pleasant and wrote about things in the area. So everyone knew her. Everyone liked her. She was an extremely revered person in the community. So whenever anything bad happened, even prior to Mothman, she was the person you went to talk to. If someone didn't want to talk to the police, or if somebody didn't want to talk to the newspaper, they would go to Mary Hire first because they had a trust with her. The town as a collective had a trust with Mary.
Great. What types of things would people call Mary for? What types of reports would people file with her? What kind of happenings and occurrences? What would people report?
During Mothman?
Yeah.
Okay. during the sightings, Mary would get reports of winged monsters. She would get reports of people coming to interview them that were dressed strangely, people that were following them around in out-of-date cars, anything that was unusual that people didn't initially want attention drawn to themselves for would go to Mary first and see if it was happening to other people. They knew that Mary wouldn't print their stories without her permission, and that it was somebody to talk to find out what was going on before they revealed the entire story.
Aside from Mothman sightings, UFOs in the sky, people also reported a great deal of hearing odd noises, beeps, a great deal of electronic disturbances and problems in the community like that. Tell me about what was happening and what were people reporting to Mary regarding those things.
Okay. There was a lot of electrical problems around this time that were a majority of Mary's problems. It was strange beeping in the phones, people hearing electronic voices carrying on conversations that sounded like it was right above their head or on their roof or in their backyard. And Mary herself was having phone trouble. She would have people call her talking about events that hadn't happened yet. Everyone was having trouble with anything electronic during that time. Car batteries, things like that were happening that were all commonplace when looked at as a collective, but at the time were very unusual occurrences to be happening so frequently.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the Men in Black now. People face intrusions with many people call the Men in Black. Can you tell me a little bit about these incidents with government officials?
Okay. A few months after the sightings, for my money, when this story got really weird, was when the alleged Men in Black showed up in Point Pleasant. These were men that were dressed in suits that were olive-skinned. There have been many reports that they just didn't seem to fit in. And in a small town like Point Pleasant, something like that would stand out tremendously. But to have this many of them in town was very bizarre. They would interview witnesses. They didn't seem to have a grasp of the English language. They didn't seem to understand basic things like ballpoint pens or Jell-O. They just seemed like they weren't supposed to be here in time and place. And we're asking questions that didn't seem relevant to any investigation, let alone anything Mothman related.
Great. That's great. Can you tell me, so some of these people who were being confronted by some of these men, people who had spotted Mothman and the UFOs?
Right.
Can you tell me, like, tell me who was being confronted and, who was being confronted by these people and by who?
Okay. The Men in Black seem to be targeting two things. They seem to be targeting the contactees, the UFO and the Mothman, people who had seen Mothman and the UFOs, and attempting to scare them, attempting to silence the stories, attempting to put more fear on them to what was going on. And they were also going after Mary Hyre and people who were making stories and making things out of what was going on. Essentially, in modern speak, they were going after the media. They were trying to control the story. They were trying to be public relations for whatever it was that was going on. And they tried to silence John Keel. They tried to silence Mary Hyre. Anything that would put the story in a bigger light is what they were focusing on.
Can you tell me a bit about your own... Can you tell me about your own theories and research and kind of stories that you've developed for your books? And are these based in kind of serious theory that you come up with? Or tell me about some of these ideas about your take on the Men in Black there.
Okay. Now, personally, I don't know what the Men in Black were or what they were doing. To me, it seems very government driven. There was a lot of stuff going on with the Air Force, and they had Project Blue Book out of Dayton, Ohio, that we know that the government was looking into UFO reports. They were looking into UFO activity. We also know that there was a lot of things going on at the TNT area that we were not aware of and still aren't aware of. So I tend to believe more that the Men in Black were government in some way, but their descriptions were certainly out of the ordinary. Whether they were doing that intentionally to keep people from theorizing they were government, I don't know, but it seems awfully well orchestrated and that these people had access to far more information than we did.
I'm going to ask you some comic book questions.
Sure.
After I get the facts.
No problem.
Okay, we're moving on. Sorry, there's too many questions, but
Smoke.
This is what you get for me.
That's what I get for being a writer.
I want to talk a little bit about. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Injured Cold events, Woodrow Derenberger, things like that. So, let's talk a minute about the Injured Cold and the Woodrow Derenberger case. Can you tell me about this, specifically how it started, as if I've never heard it?
Okay. Okay, now the first sighting, it was on a highway. Is that
I
correct?
believe he was coming home from work. And
That's right. He was coming home from work. That's right. Okay, let me set this up. Okay. The Woodrow Derenberger case was always a point of interest for me because Woody was a very believable, soul of the earth kind of guy who had a very unusual series of contacts with an entity who called himself Injured Cold. And it started with Woody was driving home from work and saw a cigar-shaped object on the road and was basically introduced to Injured Cold, who was supposedly an extraterrestrial being who could talk to Woody and Woody alone via telepathy. And apparently only certain people could respond to that level of telepathy, which was why Woodrow kept getting contacts from Mr. Cold. And this occurred over several months, several instances. At one point, Mr. Cold took Mr. Derenberger to Lanulos, his home planet, which was a utopian society of naked people in the galaxy of, wait a minute. I'm sorry. In the galaxy of Gamamine. And it's the classic UFO story of he was gone for several days, but he came back and he'd only been gone for 10 minutes in real time. And the Injured Cold story, to me, doesn't relate to Mothman, but ultimately all of this stuff is related somehow. Were the Mothman Indrid's henchmen? Was it all part of a greater scheme? Nobody knows, but Woodrow's contacts and Woodrow's experiences are among the most unique. That's all right. But to me, Woodrow's experiences were the most unique because they were believable in an unbelievable way. I've lost my train of thought.
That's all right.
All right, let me try it again.
It's actually, you covered it.
Okay, it's fine.
So what you do is tell me about the Woodrow Cold. It's kind of like, just when you thought it couldn't get weirder around here, it's like these things keep topping each other. It's like weird lights, then a fucking flying demon, and then now it's like an alien talking to a dude, like on a regular basis. It's like they just keep kind of outdoing one another. Can you talk about as if, now, in terms of the story, it's like now, just when you thought it couldn't get weirder, it's like reports out of Parkersburg, West Virginia, start telling of a guy who's not only seeing UFOs, but communicating with, its inhabitants. And can you just maybe start at something like that and tell me a little bit about what he was enduring?
Mr. Derenberger? Yeah. Okay. As if the bright lights in the sky wasn't strange enough, and as if, giant birds interacting with people didn't set everybody off. You had Woodrow Derenberger, who was essentially hanging out with an alien all the time, talking sports, talking high-level things, and visiting his planet and everything else. You just started to wonder what people were starting to think in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1967. A lot of people thought it was the beginning of the rapture, that there were so many weird things going on, and it just kept getting worse and progressing, that something was inevitably going to happen to top it each time. And I think the unease really started when Woodrow Derenberger started appearing on television and talking about his contacts with Injured Cold.
Can you tell me about Woodrow's first encounter again? What happened first time Woodrow Derenberger encounters Indrid Cold?
Okay.
Do you remember what happened?
The first time Woody talked to Indrid Cold, it was on a highway between Parkersburg and Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where Mr. Cold exited a long cigar-shaped object on a road and spoke to Woody telepathically. And this is where the famous line, "Do not be afraid, I will see you in time," came from. That he basically communicated with Woody and let Woody know that he would be talking to him again, but that he wanted to tell people about Indrid Cold. He wanted people to know that he was contacted by this entity.
Woody had multiple sightings. This wasn't like a one-time thing. It became a lifestyle for him. Can you tell me about
Smoke for me?
how he had many sightings, how they became almost routine, and tell me about some of the things that were happening to him. Let this smoke go and give me a minute to think about that. That's good. So yeah, tell me about Derenberger's multiple sightings. It wasn't one thing. It's like it becomes a lifestyle for the guy.
Right. Woody's entire life changed after the first meeting with Indrid Cold because Mr. Cold just seemed to have a camaraderie with Woodrow Derenberger and contacted him several times over several months. And Woodrow Derenberger sort of became the poster child for UFO contactees. He was thrust into a celebrity spotlight and, even wrote a book, Visitors from Lanulos. Let me do it again. And Woody even wrote a book called Visitors from Lanulos that covered his life as a UFO contactee.
Can you tell me, as this gets routine for him, what are some of the things that go on? I mean, it's like eventually even his wife and children come forward and say, yes, this is happening. And, I've even heard of an account where he goes to a psychiatrist to get looked at. And then 2 months after he goes to the psychiatrist comes forward and says, the same thing happened to me 2 months later. Someone spoke to me mentally. Okay, that's fine. Tell him, what time does he have to go? Ask him if like 30 minutes is okay. Okay, great.
I don't know a lot about Woody's multiples.
About the
I don't know like the specifics of.
Okay.
I had read about the psychiatrist, but I don't know a lot about it.
Okay. Can you just maybe vaguely touch on there's few I don't know. What I'm trying, aside from telling you that it happens all the time to him, maybe give me 2 examples or something like that of something weird, like, you know what I mean? That's routine, even if it's just, he's routinely talking to supposedly an extraterrestrial and, whatever. Something like that.
Okay. Woody was talking to Mr. Cole several times over a several-month period, but apparently they weren't talking about specific things. There was always kind of a generality to it, which I think led a lot of skeptics to think that Woody was making this up or was hallucinating it. But, Mr. Cold would appear on highways. He would appear on Woody's front door. I know Woody's wife and children confirmed that Indrid Cold was paying semi-regular visits. So there's a lot of credibility to it, but there wasn't a lot of good, solid information to back it.
And even the night of his first encounter, one thing that's pretty interesting is that to a degree can actually be sustained as occurring. There were other witnesses that came forward that said they drove by his car on the highway and saw a figure standing there talking to him. Can you tell me about that? And there were people who saw lights in the sky over the same area that he said was happening to.
The interesting thing about Woodrow's first contact with Indrid Cold is that it can be corroborated. Other people saw lights at the same instant that Woodrow Derenberger saw the lights in the sky. There were several witnesses that reported seeing Woodrow Derenberger standing on the highway talking to this man. There were several people that saw the ship parked on the road. So it's a great example of a UFO contactee that seems legitimate.
Right. Can you tell me what Derenberger said Indrid Cold's physical appearance, what did he look like? Do you remember this?
Because he's in my next book.
He said he just looked like a normal person, right?
Yeah.
That's what was kind of weird about.
Yeah.
I throw in there, if someone's making this up, talking about meeting an extraterrestrial, more than likely they're going to give it tentacles and whatever. But this guy's alien was like an everyday man.
Right. Yeah. Another reason why a lot of people don't believe Woodrow Derenberger or pass him off as a fictional account was that the Indrid Cold that he experienced wasn't all that interesting in appearance. It wasn't a demonly sight. It wasn't a large head, giant eyes. It was a guy in a suit who had kind of an odd smile that had pointed features, maybe olive skinned, but there was nothing unusual about Mr. Cold at all, other than he showed up in a cigar shaped ship to talk to some dude on a highway in Parkersburg. The movie version of Indrid Cold was far more interesting than anything I had read.
And can you tell me about the fact that, for the people that disbelieve him, if someone's going to make this up, this guy's not, a scientist at NASA. He's kind of an average working class guy. And, if he's going to, I think a lot of people think that, if he's going to make this up, he's going to make it more embellished. He's going to make it this alien with tentacles and green. It's the 60s, you know what I mean? So even more so getting away with it there. But just tell me a little bit about the fact that his, description of this alien is very humanistic, and that almost adds a bit of believability for most people because, why not make it some ridiculous thing if you're going to make it up?
All right. A lot of people weren't sure if Woodrow Derenberger was chasing a spotlight or if his experiences were real and genuine. A lot of people think they were because his descriptions were so average. His visits to the planet Lanulos were so almost laced in cliche and, borderline uninteresting. Woodrow Derenberger was an average guy. He was a pretty good looking guy, had a nice wife, had some nice kids. He didn't really have a reason to have a spotlight shown on him. So if he were to do that intentionally, I think he would have come up with a more interesting premise to get this attention.
For more information about our program, or to find out where you can watch the original documentary film or purchase a limited edition signed DVD copy, please visit www.eyesofthemothman.com.
Can you tell me, interesting thing about Woody's experience is that his incidents and experiences not only affected him, but everything around him. He received harassing phone calls. He lost his job. Again, the story with the psychiatrist or whatever, but it also affected his family.
Smoke it up for me.
Can you tell me just that
and
this
fan
wasn't
it
just
was the thing?
Personal? It didn't just kind of affect him, but the world around him, his family, his friends, and he actually didn't benefit many times from this. He lost a lot of things. He became, there was like severe depression. He lost his family. I think they divorced eventually. Lost his job. With the phone problems, things like that. Can you tell me about some of these negative kind of responses that came with his story? So he really didn't benefit from this much at all.
Can you fan it for me?
Okay, that's good.
Okay,
good.
If Woodrow Derenberger was chasing attention, he certainly got it, but I don't know it was the kind he wanted. For years he was harassed via phone. He had depression. He suffered headaches, job loss. He was eventually, involved in a bitter divorce, had to move away from the area because of his notoriety. So I don't think somebody would come forward with a story like this and endure the pain that he had to endure in the years following it, just to chase a little celebrity or to self-publish a book.
Can you tell me, how does Woody's story, how does it end? It sounds like he almost kind of went a little neurotic and crazy, even for him in the end. Like I said, he gets divorced, he gets alone, and his problems elevate. He feels like he's being watched all the time. He feels like people are tampering with his mail. How does the story of Woodrow Derenberger kind of end?
All right. As with most, As with most contactees, paranoia becomes a huge factor. If they weren't paranoid before, they're definitely going to be paranoid afterward because they have no reason not to be. And Woodrow, I wish, had a happy ending, but a lot of people don't really know what happened to Woodrow Derenberger. I had read that there was a period where he was being paid to, give tours around the area and was trying to benefit a little bit from it in sort of his twilight. I don't know if any of that is true, but, Woody just kind of drifted off into the sunset and people left him alone. I know that he remarried someone much younger, who was allegedly a fellow contactee, which is very common in the field of contactees to happen. But I just don't really know the end of his story.
We're almost done. I'm going to skip a lot of this stuff. I'm just going to talk to you now about Silver Bridge.
Okay.
So December 15th, 1967, a year to the date of the first big Mothman sighting. If you could point that out, that would be interesting, because I haven't had anyone do that yet. It's a year to the exact date that the first big Mothman sighting is spotted.
It's 13 months to the date.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Mothman was November, Bridge was December.
Oh, right. Yeah, you're right. And it's the bridge's 39th year in existence. Before jumping right into the collapse, can you build me up to like what the night was? Paint like a kind of picture for me, like the night of the collapse. What kind of night was it?
Sure, absolutely.
Build me up to the collapse.
Okay. December 15th, 1967 was just like any other day in Point Pleasant. People were getting off work. It was a week or so before the Christmas holiday. People were busy preparing for Christmas. It was an unusually busy day for bridge traffic because there were so many shoppers, so many people traveling back and forth between Gallipolis and Point Pleasant, that the bridge was taking an unusually high volume of traffic, which is pretty typical for the season. Completely forgot what I was going to say.
Sorry. No, you're building me up to the crash, so...
Can I start from there, or do you want me to start?
Yeah, no, start from there.
Okay.
I don't know why, there was traffic on the bridge, whatever. However, you were close to the end anyway.
Right.
Without going into the fall of it.
Gotcha. Okay.
What else?
Okay. And traffic was pretty heavy on the bridge, as it was most holiday seasons. There were nothing unusual going on. There was a traffic light out on the bridge, which was just coincidental, so that there was traffic backed up and slow traffic on the bridge that day.
Can you tell me about the collapse? What would that have looked like? What happened, basically? Tell me about like the collapse of the bridge.
Okay. Engineers later proved that the collapse of the Silver Bridge was caused by strain. When the bridge was designed and built, it was never intended to have that much traffic on it over that long of a period of time. I mean, the bridge had been up for almost 40 years at that point and was worn down. People who lived here always called it the old rickety bridge. John Keel often referred to it as the bridge that swayed, that he never felt comfortable in the bridge. It was always known to be worn out, a little rickety, and it was almost a joke that it wasn't as stable and sturdy as it should be.
Can you tell me, like, for someone who would be on the bridge or watching it the night it fell, what happened? Like, can you describe like how it felt? Did it fall in pieces? Was it instantaneous? Cars falling off the bridge into the water?
Right.
Tell me about that.
Okay. The total fall of the bridge happened in a span of maybe a minute and a half. People on the bridge heard a rumble. Some cables started to snap, which was later determined to be the I-bar had worn out above the bridge that released the cables. But it essentially was a domino effect, that the bridge just fell into the water, that it was a very uneventful event. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
That it was a very uneventful sight to see. It was just the bridge collapsing and falling. Cars were falling. It was obviously a horrible thing to experience, but people think of a big dramatic Hollywood type disaster like a Titanic or a Poseidon adventure, but in actuality, it was just a bridge that just gave out, that was tired and just fell. And there happened to be several cars on it and several lives lost that day.
Can you just tell me about the magnitude of the bridge falling? This is a small community, so it's like, even though it's a small bridge, 46 people died, but can you tell me, it's kind of like 46 in a city is one thing, 46 in a small town can be 25, 10% of the population. Can you tell me just the effects of 46 people dying on this bridge, how hard hitting it was to the community?
Okay.
So small.
Okay. Nationally, this became one of the greatest bridge tragedies of the time. And locally, this affected the area in a way that it still does. I mean, you can still feel that pain of what happened. These were your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your grandparents, people in your church. These were people you worked with. This was taking a slice of a community and just making it disappear in an instant of 2 or 3 minutes of absolute horror that to this day, I think is still quite palpable in the town. When you go to site where the bridge used to be, there is a sadness to that. And there is a sadness to the town to this day that bridge is gone and that happened. People still talk about it. People are still affected by it. You can't be in Point Pleasant talking to people more than an hour before you come across someone who lost a sister, who lost a parent, a husband on that bridge. To me, that is one of the worst things that's ever happened in this area.
Okay, a few more questions and we'll get to the comic book stuff and we're done.
Sure.
Can you just tell me about the damages after it's all said and done? The Silver Bridge, how many people died, casualties, survivors, things like that? What's the damage done after the bridge falls?
Okay. Once the dust settled, it was determined that 46 people had died on the bridge. There were a couple of bodies that were never accounted for, but for weeks, there was such an uncertainty of people missing. There was trauma for months after it happened because dead bodies would be floating on the river. They would surface. They would see, bloated white bodies just wash up in their yard, people that lived, near the river. It was a horribly traumatic thing. It took months to determine what caused the bridge. I know that they had tried to rebuild it in another part of town in a field to kind of understand what had happened. But there was such confusion and such just bad feelings about everything that had happened that it took so long to process everything.
Great. Okay, I got to change tape.
Can you widen out a little bit now? Sure, just a little bit. Cool. So tell me, was the Silver Bridge collapse, was it almost like a cap for all these odd things to happen? One, because kind of after the bridge fell, all the weird stuff kind of ended. So at the same time, was it kind of like a closing to all of the strange and unusual things? But at the same time, did it evoke new questions? Because now people were like, well, now, is this related? But was it a closure for a lot of these things because the stuff stopped afterwards? And at the same time, did it evoke other questions as well?
Okay. Looking back on the Silver Bridge disaster with, 40 plus years distance between it, it seems obvious that this was a culmination of the events of the 13 months previous. But, at the time, I think when people around here, went through I'm sorry, let me try it again. Okay. But around here at the time of the disaster, I don't think people cared about Mothman anymore. I think this trumped everything that had been happening. Nobody cared about lights. Nobody cared about creatures or anything. This was the big thing. No one cared about that goofy stuff anymore. People died on the bridge. They didn't know who was dead. This wiped out everything for years after.
There was speculation that people heard like a sonic boom sound before the bridge fell. And that kind of sparked controversy because a lot of people didn't buy into the eye-bar theory. Are you familiar with that at all? That there was like this rumbling noise heard. So like a lot of people said, well, if there's a sonic boom noise before the bridge falls, it doesn't really come with, an eye-bar falling out. There's something else to it. Can you just tell me a little bit about that there was this kind of rumor floating around that a lot of people said, well, I had heard this before the fall of the bridge. And that kind of caused a lot of disbelief in the acceptance of, it was just a faulty eyeball.
Right. Okay. There's a theory also that the eye-bar had nothing to do with the bridge disaster. People reported hearing a sonic boom or an explosion under the bridge or something prior to the bridge collapsing. Theories were later given out by engineers that was the steel girder snapping as the eye-bar broke, that the eye-bar was set forth a chain of events to where it wasn't necessarily the eye-bar, but what was resulted from the stress of not having the eye-bar supports on the beams. And a lot of people said that it was the cable snapping, it was concrete breaking after the eye-bar broke, but there is a somewhat popular theory among paranormal believers that there was something else to that.
Okay. It's also been reported that there were sightings of the Mothman just prior to the bridge falling. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, okay. There were a couple of reports that people saw the Mothman hunched on the bridge. There were people that said that they saw the Mothman flying under the bridge. There was a very popular report that came across later that a day or two before they saw two government-type agents in suits inspecting the bridge. There were so many theories, but I don't think at the time anyone thought Mothman or the Curse of Chief Cornstalk had anything to do with that terrible tragedy.
Do you think, in your opinion, do most people buy the faulty eyebar theory? Most people accept that?
I think the popular belief is the eyebar theory, because the engineers examined the bridge. It was a fact. The bridge was worn out. The bridge was tired and was going to be replaced eventually. So I think the eyebar theory is convenient and the most believable.
Great. Just two more, and we're good. And then I'll ask you about the comment.
Sure.
Do you think this mystery is ever going to be solved? Is this kind of too complex beyond the rationale of the human mind? Are we not supposed to know what this is all about?
I don't know that anyone's ever going to solve the mystery of the Mothman. I don't think there was enough information given to us. I don't think the information that was given to us was clear enough. And I think there's been far too much time passed from the events to go in and research and try to solve these problems, because if it hasn't been solved yet, I'm not sure it's going to be solved without future pieces of information being given to us.
Do you have an opinion on all this in terms of the meaning or purpose of all this? Do you have any conclusion that you've drawn in your work?
I have absolutely no conclusion on the events of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I'm fascinated by them, but I honestly do not know what happened. I don't doubt these things happened with the sightings, with the UFOs, with the Mothman. I just do not have a context in my mind to put this together.
Can you widen out to see the alleyway or see the runway thing there?
The aisle?
Yeah, the aisle. I just want to see, does that look weird? See how the smoke is drifting there to the left? Do you think that looks good or bad?
It's cool, but I'll get rid of it.
No. I'm saying to use it. Do you think it's
sure? Let's lose it. It's a weird thing. I mean, look how little it's moving. That's really wild.
It's really bizarre.
All right, go ahead. Look at it. It's like it's emanating from the lights.
Yeah. So,
I hope it's not.
Let me ask this final question for these.
You can take a look.
All right. People in Point Pleasant seem to be very strong. They've dealt with a lot of hardship and loss over the years. Can you talk to me about this, especially with the kind of the festival that's annual now? The idea of, it's kind of weird. It took me a while to think about this, but they almost celebrate these tragedies and these horrors that have happened. And in a sense, though, it's kind of symbolic of the type of people that they are. They've kind of deal with things. They've had to roll with things. I mean, their town is like, never ending in terms of hardship here. Can you just talk to me a little about how this is kind of an example of the strong will of the people that are here, that they kind of keep moving and progressing, and now they even celebrate these things that were once kind of unspoken.
Right. I admire the people of Point Pleasant for dealing with such horrible luck, such horrible tragedies, and still maintaining, a fairly decent sense of humor about the whole thing. The best example of that is the Mothman Festival every fall. People come and celebrate monster sightings. They celebrate UFOs. They don't celebrate a bridge tragedy, but they, respect it in a way that, people can come out and talk about it and, read books and talk to other people that are interested in the Mothman from all over the world. And people in small towns in this area in particular, I grew up in this area. These people don't lie down. They take their lumps. They keep going. At the end of the day, it's about getting up in the morning, going to work, doing your job, and coming home. And to deal with such adversity that they have and still be such strong-willed, hardworking people amazes me to this day.
Okay, so we're good with this. Tell me now about, talk about the comic to try to use for the other thing. Tell me, if you can give me like a nice kind of broad answer that covers the whole gamut of the comic. Tell me about just the work you've put into it, the research, why you did it, and tell me about some of the great artwork there, the people you've got behind it. Tell me about those things.
Okay. I'm going to read a quote.
Sure.
So I'm going to assume that you'll cut to artwork while I'm reading this.
Sure, no problem.
All right. The idea came about to do a Mothman comic book in 2002. I had been writing a few projects, but nothing had really surfaced yet in print. So I was still looking for projects that I was interested in, that I wanted to work on. And I immediately had an idea that I wanted to do a Mothman project, but I didn't know what it was. So I was doing some research, more of just a hobby, and trying to get ideas, and I was taking notes, and I was trying to let the research build the story. When one night really late, I was skimming through one of John Keel's books, and I had kind of drifted out of the paragraph but was still reading, and I came across a sentence that gave me my idea. And the sentence read, "Some future investigator of the paranormal may wander into those hills someday, talk with these people, and write a whole chapter of a learned book on demonology, repeating this piece of folklore." I read that in a different context, and the idea came into my head. What if that researcher was from 900 years from now? What if he was a resident of Point Pleasant, and 900 years of evolution and history had gone by, but those people were still obsessed with Mothman to the point where they created sort of a psychological time travel to where they could come back for minutes at a time and witness these events. And, these people would obviously look a lot different than we do now because they've had 900 years of evolution and technology. They would have a different color skin. They wouldn't really understand the language. They would sound stilted. They probably wouldn't be able to hit the fashion right exact because of such a broad range. So they'd either be wearing clothes that were out of style or weren't in style yet, and they would probably have inaccurate points of reference to blend in. And as I was writing all this, I realized that I had developed my own fictional theory on the Men in Black, that these people from the Paranormal Preservation Society of the distant future had disguised themselves to look like Men in Black to come back to blend in. But when they came back, there weren't any Men in Black here, that they'd inadvertently created history just by coming back to witness these events. So the story takes place off camera that you don't see in the comic book, that this society of researchers, of these zoologists, are experiencing difficulties in their organization with understanding time travel and upholding the credo of time travel that we don't see. What we see is them jumping back into time periods in the folklore, witnessing Chief Cornstalk, the first sighting in 66, the bridge disasters. We see this in these time periods, but it's actually occurring with them over a 20 or 30 year period when people don't want to do this. People want to get involved. They want to come back and change the events. So it's the conflict of time travelers set against the backdrop of the events of Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
And just briefly tell me a little bit about the artwork then.
I'm sorry. Can we have some smoke, please?
This will be the last question in case,
Fair
unless you want to
enough.
add anything else to it. I think you covered it pretty well. So
Okay.
And just so add something else for the little segment. Just talk to me about the art.
Sure.
In that direction.
Okay.
If you could just fan it up for me.
That's good. We don't need any more. It's good. You can keep it. You don't have to press it. There's none.
You were wrong.
So tell me a little bit about the artwork that's found in your comic.
Okay. When I'd completed the first draft of the script, I looked at it as having three very distinct acts in a play. I had three completely different time periods framed around an extremely distant future that would look like nothing we've ever seen before. So I opted to use different artists with completely different styles to tell these stories. I took a digital artist named Jason Moser who specialized in futuristic type artwork and digitally rendered artwork. And instead of putting him on the future sequences, I gave him the Cornstalk chapter. I wanted him to display sort of a stilted, uncomfortable version of the events of Chief Cornstalk, so where the time travelers would look out of place. I used a more organic style with the first sighting of the Mothman. I used a completely darker, washed out style for the bridge chapter. And then I used a very highly detailed artist named Ryan Scott to draw these future sequences. And all the guys did amazing work because I didn't show them the other chapters as they were being drawn. I showed them a picture of what the characters looked like and how these characters would age over their 20-year time period. But these guys were given complete freedom based on photographic reference to create their vision within their chapter. So in the end, it all was cohesive into the final story, but each chapter is very individualized.
I don't think I left out anything Mothman or anything else related, right? We kind of.
I think we got it all, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we got more than. All right, we're good now.
All right. Cut.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Eyes of the Mothman, the podcast. For more information about our program, or to find out where you can watch the original documentary film or purchase a limited edition signed DVD copy, please visit www.eyesofthemothman.com.